in welcoming the Prime Minister of Tuvalu, His Excellency ENELE Sosene Sopoaga, to address the General Assembly.
President of the General Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, next week on the 1st of October, Tuvalu will mark its 39th anniversary of independence. It gives me great pleasure, therefore, on behalf of the government and people of Tuvalu, to thank the United Nations and all its membership for granting Tuvalu the recognition of full sovereignty in October 1978. 29 years on the eve of the 21st century, September 2000, Tuvalu was admitted as the 169th member of the United Nations, with the rights of full participation as a member of the United Nations family. Our joining the United Nations is a journey of hope. Hope in the noble values of this great body, the United Nations, and trust in its ability to assure humanity, including small and vulnerable countries like mine, peace and security and prosperity for our survival. I record Tuvalu's sincere gratitude to the United Nations and its specialized agencies, development partners, especially our traditional partners in the Pacific, regional bodies of the Pacific, friends in Asia, India, South Korea, Japan, in the Republic of China, Taiwan, in the European Union and others, for all your support to my island nation of Tuvalu. We welcome the friendship and partnership of the United Nations members and other entities as we advance forward. Mr. President, Tuvalu applauds the theme of the 72nd General Debate, focusing on people, striving for peace and a decent life for all on a sustainable planet. It captures the undeniable linkage between peace, security, and sustainable development. It underscores that without peace and security, our 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development will not deliver a fair globalization for all. In short, without sustainable development, there will be no peace and no security. I congratulate you, Mr. President of the General Assembly, on your appointment to the presidency, and of course, for your vision on the 72nd session with a theme to focus on people. I also congratulate the outgoing President of the General Assembly, Mr. Peter Thompson of Fiji, for his efforts and outstanding leadership on many fronts. Mr. President, as a small and vulnerable island nation, I want to express Tuvalu's deepest sympathy to the people in the United States of America and in the Caribbean islands who are suffering or have been affected by the destruction of the recent hurricanes and tropical cyclones in that region. These unfortunate events clearly show the magnitude and urgency of global work still required of the United Nations to better prepare, protect, and save peoples and humanity from these calamities. We also share the devastating grief for the people of Mexico, including young school children, following the earthquake this week, and other peoples suffered by similar disasters and violence around the world. Our prayers that Almighty God gives comfort to the affected people and their loved ones and for speedy recovery. Mr. President, horrific acts of violence and terrorism continue to plague our world. Countless innocent lives are destroyed and lost. Violence in any form is a direct threat to peace and security, and seriously undermine our efforts to achieve sustainable development. We therefore condemn violence and terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. We are particularly concerned with the threats to global peace and security posed by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We acknowledge the persistent efforts of the Security Council to de-escalate tensions. A renewed engagement with inclusive diplomatic dialogue is, in our view, the only option to solve the crisis on the Korean Peninsula. We believe that the military option or response will lead to unimaginable destruction and loss of lives. In this vein, Tuvalu maintains its commitments in support of all international legal instruments against violence and terrorism. It is critical that we support international law for the protection and promotion of human rights. We commend, therefore, the establishment of the Office of Counterterrorism to ensure the effective and balanced implementation of the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy. Excellencies, just yesterday, with pride on behalf of my country, Tuvalu, I signed the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons as a further demonstration of our commitment to the elimination of nuclear weapons and also to the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone Treaty, which was negotiated and drafted in 1984 by Pacific Island Leaders Forum that was held in my own country, Tuvalu. It is our fervent hope that nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction, including the trade of materials and the development of technologies to produce such weapons, are totally banned, outlawed, and prohibited worldwide by the United Nations. Humanity must be advanced not on the principles of fear and deterrence, not on the adage of might is right, but rather on moral justice for humanity, equity, trust, respect, and the full enjoyment of basic human rights. Mr. President, the entry into force of the Paris Agreement last year raised our hopes that, recognizing the existential threats to us all, member states would commit to the common cause of fighting climate change, adapting to its impact, and strengthening the ability of developing states, especially the most vulnerable, to deal with those impacts. The Paris Agreement is our common hope of a decent life on a sustainable planet. For Tuvalu, it is our hope of security and survival. That hope, however, dimmed with the announcement by the United States that it will abandon the Paris Agreement. That decision risks undermining our global efforts to save and protect the livelihoods of the people that are at risk from the impacts of climate change. These are the marginalized, the vulnerable, the poor, the women and children who suffer the most from climate change, and especially the people living on low-lying islands and coastal areas. These people count in the tens of millions, and the number is increasing at an alarming rate. Domestic economic and political interests, Mr. President, are often short-term and benefiting only a few. And these should not be pursued at the expense of a decent life for us all, current and future generations, on a sustainable planet. This is a spirit that underpins our 21st century of development systems. We therefore urge the United States to reunite with us and to allow all of us, in particular the most vulnerable, the best possible chance to save ourselves and the sustainable future of humanity. We are, Excellencies, nevertheless encouraged by this morning, by the strong leadership that was delivered by the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and French President on climate change, to whom go our highest commendations. Thank you very much for your courage. We welcome the Secretary General's intention to convene a dedicated climate summit in 2019 to mobilize political support. It will be an important opportunity, in our view, to review our progress and momentum, and most importantly, to enhance our commitments to take urgent and credible actions to reverse global warming. We are also encouraged by the Secretary General's commitment to intensify high-level political engagement to limit the temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and in fact aiming at limiting the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Likewise, we are heartened by his dedication to rallying the United Nations systems to better support member states by mobilizing resources, strengthening partnerships in their pursuance of climate actions. Indeed, without enhanced commitment and genuine partnerships, the Paris Agreement will not save us all, especially the most vulnerable. Climate change is a risk multiplier on all factors of development. Its challenges are complex and keep on changing. It is for this reason that we reiterate our call for the appointment of a special representative on climate change and security for enhanced international focus, coordination, and commitment. In the same vein, Mr. President, we call for climate change and security to be a permanent item in the agenda of the Security Council, given its direct threat to global peace and security. For Tuvalu and many of the low-lying islands, our peace and security is not imperiled by traditional threats of conflicts, violence, drugs, weapons, famine, or diseases. Instead, as the Malé Declaration on the Human Dimension of Climate Change recognized in 2007, the impacts of climate change pose the most immediate, fundamental, and far-reaching threat to individuals and communities in these most vulnerable states, and threaten a wide range of human rights, including the right to life, the right to take part in cultural life, the right to use and enjoy property, the right to an adequate standard of living, the right to food, and the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. 10 years ago, Mr. President, we recognized that climate change was the single major threat to our peace, security, and ultimately our survival. It remains so today, and the situation grows more urgent every day. Under current warming trends, our islands may be submerged into the sea within the next 50 years. If and when this happens, we will be forced to abandon our islands, even though we are the least contributors to global warming and sea level rise. That forced relocation or displacement of our people is an injustice, an infringement on our fundamental and basic human rights. It is for this very reason that we continue to call for enhanced global commitment and partnerships in the implementation of the Paris Agreement. We cannot give up on this campaign, especially for two very reasons. First, relocation and statelessness are totally unacceptable, as many of us here in this room would agree. And second, we know, as you do, that the membership of our global family of the United Nations has the tools and the resources to save Tuvalu and low-lying states from the impacts of climate change. It is only a question of whether we have the will and the courage to help these people. That preparation, Mr. President, we have come together to face grave risks before over the many years. International community, guided by the Charter, our own Charter, cooperated on many fronts to deal with threats such as Ebola, cholera, violence, natural disasters, and subsequently the lives and rights of people displaced by such threats. The international response was immediate. The response was also immediate because threats were potential global threats to humanity. For others, however, their response was driven by political and economic interests. Sadly, however, displacement by impacts of climate change have not yet drawn the same international concerns and response, despite the fact that it has the very real potential to becoming a serious threat to global peace, security, and human rights. Uncontrolled mass migration into Europe as a result of conflicts and natural disasters, for example, taught us very important lessons that we should have hand in place effective international institutions and systems to control, manage, and protect the rights of migrants. In exactly the same manner, Mr. President, we must now be formulating effective international systems to protect the human rights of people displaced by the impacts of climate change and avoid further uncontrolled mass migration and mass violation of human rights. That preparation must include developing the appropriate international legal tools to cope with the complex and multifaceted challenges posed by climate change. In particular, the current refugee regimes, which were developed to cope with the traditional threats, do not adequately protect people forced to leave their homes by the impacts of climate change. We therefore reiterate our proposal for a United Nations resolution on the establishment of a legal process to protect the human rights and ultimately save the lives of people displaced by the impacts of climate change. Mr. President, as a least developed country in a small island developing states, we need enhanced global support to overcome the structural challenges we face in implementing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. On our own part, Tuvalu has developed its own national strategy for sustainable development, known as Te Kakenga Tolu, premised on building resilience through good governance, inclusive participation, and capacity measures of mitigation of NDCs with targets of 100% renewable energy by 2020 and coastal protection adaptation on all islands to protect and save Tuvalu. We are grateful to the international community through the work of the Green Climate Fund, the Global Environmental Fund, and the United Nations as a partner, as well as through other donors and bilateral partners for their generous support to Tuvalu. While grateful of that goodwill, we have established our own Tuvalu Climate Change and Disaster Survival Fund as a facility to help people respond quickly to impacts of climate change. To enhance further adaptation work, access to appropriate infrastructures, maritime ports on the islands, airports, technology connectivity, health, quality education, and renewable energy are critical areas of particular priority. Tuvalu will welcome the development of genuine and durable partnerships as are aspired under the Samoa pathway. In regards to the issue of LDC graduation, it is our view that a country must only graduate when it can achieve sustainable development, not merely when it should be able to achieve sustainable development. Unique vulnerability of SITs, LDCs like Tuvalu, must be the central criteria of consideration for LDC graduation. As a small island surrounded by vast oceans, Mr. President, we interact with the oceans every day of our lives. We are heavily dependent on the ocean. The ocean is central to our achievement of sustainable development. We firmly believe that once we have established our baselines under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, these baselines, as well as the maritime zones identified, shall be remained forever. This is irrespective of sea level rise. The ongoing discussions on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity beyond the areas of national jurisdictions, the BBNJ must ensure that small island developing states with our particular vulnerabilities are provided the necessary financial and technical support to guarantee our equal and fair participation in the management of BBNJ and the sharing of benefits. We must agree at this Assembly to commence work on developing a legal binding agreement to give protection to biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions. Our 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is universal and holistic in that it applies to all countries and actors and covers all aspects of sustainable development. Critical to its success, the agenda is rooted in human rights and genuine partnerships. But, Mr. President, the vibrant democracy of Taiwan, who has long been an active and responsible development partner to many countries, including Tuvalu, is being denied participation in this great body, the United Nations and its systems. It cannot be right that the 22nd largest global economy with a notable capacity to contribute could not effectively participate in our 2030 agenda. This is unfortunate when our 2030 agenda needs genuine global partnerships to mobilize all available resources to be successful. Under its principle of universality, the United Nations should allow the 23 million people of Taiwan their fundamental right to participate fully in the United Nations systems and to benefit and contribute effectively to its programs. In the same vein, the people of Cuba must be allowed freely to exercise their rights to determination and their own political, economic, and social system. With their rights and trade restricted by the unilateral blockade by the United States, the people of Cuba are denied effective participation in our United Nations SDGs programs. Of similar concerns, Mr. President, the people of West Papua should be enabled to exercise their fundamental rights with the intervention of this responsible body to allow them to determine their own development aspirations and future. West Papuans are distinct people with Pacific roots, with their own land, history, and culture. The violation of human rights in West Papua is a constant matter of great concern to us in Tuvalu. Tuvalu strongly believes the United Nations must engage in setting a clear pathway to addressing these issues and the issue of self-determination for the people of West Papua. We must embrace the genuine partnership of those who can contribute to the realization of a decent life in our marginalized communities. We cannot ignore and risk living behind those whose hope for a decent life, but are being constrained by violence, natural disasters, violation of human rights, atrocities, and impacts of climate change. We cannot leave anyone behind. Finally, Mr. President, I want to lend Tuvalu strong support for the Global Pact on the Environment initiated and proposed by France. We need an internationally legally binding agreement that protects our rights to a safe and clean environment. We are but on one big canoe for humanity. And as Prime Minister Justin said in this very hall this morning, no one has the right, no country has the right to jump ship on climate change. We either must paddle together to keep us afloat, keep the canoe afloat and safe, or allow the canoe to sink and we all get drowned. It is our hope that with this global pact on the environment and the Paris Agreement, we can save Tuvalu, and if we can save Tuvalu, we can save the world. God bless the family of the United Nations. Tuvalu Moderatua. Thank you, Mr. President.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of Tuvalu for the statement just made